pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. Going to be talking about the resurrection. This is a very important issue, and especially this time of year, we wanted to focus on it. But at the same time, also wanted to acknowledge that today there was an attack, and we will spend more time talking about this in the future, an attack that took place at the Brussels airport and also at the metro station. More than 30 people killed, 180 injured in a coordinated terrorist attack in the Belgian capital. 2 bombings in the airport where 11 people were reportedly killed and more are injured and may die later, as well as one at the metro station. This is something that should not surprise us, because as the attack was taking place, there were shouts in Arabic, gunfire, and even found an unexploded suicide belt along with one suicide bomber as well. ISIS has claimed credit for the attack, and we will spend some time later this week spending some time focusing on this attack, but I did want to at least mention that today. But during this special time, especially during a resurrection week, we like to talk about the resurrection, so I was hoping we might be able to put this together, because we have Dr. Jeremiah Johnston with us. Now, you might remember that we interviewed him in the past about his book, Unanswered, which is a book as well as a DVD series that I've used in my own church, in my own Sunday school class, and found it very helpful, because it really helps answer some of the questions people are asking that the church rarely addresses. Dr. Jeremiah Johnston is in studio with us today. He's a New Testament scholar, an apologist, received his doctorate from Middlesex University after studying at Oxford. His previous degrees were at Acadia University Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. You can probably see him on various television programs. He's been on ours as well. Quoted in USA Today, quoted quite a bit lately in Fox News, and it's just a delight to have you in studio with us today.
I'm honored to be back with you, Kerby, and it's great to be on the Point of View radio network, so thank you so much.
I've known your father, I've known you, and as I mentioned just a minute ago, after we did the interview on Unanswered, I went through and began to take whole weeks of material that you had put together and used it in my own Sunday school class, so I can give high praise to how you have answered some of those questions, and some of those certainly are important. You found that the most asked question was questions related to mental illness or suicide. Another one would certainly be the issue of the silence of God. Another one was, has the paranormal become normal? But today I thought we might focus a little bit of time and attention on the body of proof. What about the resurrection?
Absolutely.
So those are kind of focus points. And first of all, this is not just tangential to the Christian message, is it? I mean, in some respects, it's what you call first importance. Why so?
It is. When you look at what the Apostle Paul wrote, and as Christians, when we talk about the books of the New Testament, we know there are 27. Well, the Apostle Paul writes 13 of those, or gives us more than 32,000 words of the New Testament. And he says a lot of important things. I mean, think about Martin Luther reading the book of Romans, and he has this enlightening moment reading the book of Romans. He said a lot of important things, Paul did, and yet he said one thing was the most important. So I want to encourage our audience, if you're listening to us for the next hour and you can, grab your phone, grab your Bible, however you read the Word of God, and open up to 1 Corinthians 15, because we're going to see the oldest Christian tradition, the most important passage that all of Christianity pivots on. But Paul said this was a matter of utmost urgency. And it's so important we have this conversation today, Kerby, because unfortunately, when you look at the church today, we don't hear about resurrection enough. And yet, how many times is it talked about in the New Testament? There are 300 passages in the New Testament that talk about the resurrection of Jesus. Every single sermon in the book of Acts focused on the resurrection of Jesus. So when I ask my students, and you've had this with your students, why do you believe a Jewish criminal came back to life 2,000 years ago? Give me the evidence.
And again,
most of them, it's a deer in the headlights look. Well, why do we believe that?
Yes.
And so we want to encourage people that today.
Well, one of the things you've said in the video series, which goes along with this, is that we don't really deal with this too often. It's something like we just sort of take it for granted. Yet, if you go back and look at most of the early sermons, you're hard put to find any sermon in the book of Acts that does not mention the resurrection.
That's
Fair?
exactly right.
Yeah.
And over 24 times in the New Testament for our audience, it's more than any other promise given to us in the New Testament is the promise that we will be raised with Jesus Christ, physically, bodily. And so as believers, we live between two Easters. We live between two resurrection moments. That's why Jesus' resurrection is so important, because our eventual resurrection is linked with his resurrection. So we want to know more about it. We want to celebrate it. We want to honor it. And we also want to know how to explain it to those that have questions.
Let's see if we can also talk about the context, Dr. Johnston, for just a minute, because you point out in the video and in the book as well that today we're surrounded by zombies. You can get a PhD in zombie studies,
which
is amazing.
We're not making this up.
This is hard to believe, but nevertheless, and we believe in the idea of the walking dead and resurrections, things like that. But in that first century, nobody was really looking forward to a risen Messiah, right? I mean, this is so antithetical to the culture, was it not?
That's exactly right. First, in Jesus in Judaica, Jesus was a Jew, and when you study the Qumran community, no one was looking for the Messiah to die. They were looking for a coming conqueror. This is why Judas rejected Jesus Christ. They wanted a Messiah that would kill the Kittim, as the Dead Sea Scrolls said, the Romans, bloodshed everywhere, and lead Israel to unprecedented heights of victory. Nobody expected the Messiah to die. And then when you look at the Roman perspective, and I got a call from a New York Times reporter to help him write an obituary for Jesus. I would never encourage the New York Times for our audience, other than this Sunday when they have an obituary for Jesus that I was able to weigh in on. What about the Roman perspective? Nobody in Rome talked about a body coming back to physical life. They were so influenced by and not to lose anyone, the Socrates, Plato, this notion of the immortality of the soul. Socrates taught that we could become a star in the afterlife. The thought of a body that had begun to become ripened, to smell, to stink, would come back to physical life was grotesque to the Roman mind. And I have been persuaded, as other professors have, and other pastors and those who have taught this, we don't have any dying and rising God until we hear about it through the lips of the early Christians who were Jews, the early movement of Jesus Christ, nascent Christianity. There's nothing like it in the Roman Empire.
And again, sometimes you'll see the skeptics say, oh, those myths were around there, and so the Christians adopted it, but actually it's just the opposite.
It is just the opposite. And I'll say, I mean, yes, we read about other virgin-born sons of God, but nothing about a dying and rising God. It's incarnational.
Yeah, so again, let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation today with Dr. Jeremiah Johnston. And let me just mention his book, Unanswered, and it really is a series, because the book, of course, as we've mentioned before, and we have links to it on our website today, is available, but there's also a study guide and a DVD series, and I've used it before, and I highly commend it to many of you because it helps answer a lot of the questions that people are asking. And you've had thousands of individuals ask questions, and as you said, the most asked question is on mental health and suicide, but many of these others are questions that people are asking that pastors aren't answering right now.
That's exactly right, and we have to know how to answer those questions. And the beautiful attraction of Christianity is not a house of cards that you're going to bring down. Trust me, if you're out there right now, you've not thought of a question that hasn't been asked of God or Jesus in the last 2,000 years. Christianity can sustain it, and the power of Christianity, the attraction of it is we can answer the questions of the day, and we can do so with boldness, but also have confidence. We can have joy in our faith.
Dr. Jeremiah Johnston in studio with us today, and you can listen, but you can also watch. Matter of fact, a little bit later, you might want to download the podcast and play it again, or even watch it on our YouTube channel. But we're talking about one of the chapters, Chapter 2, Unanswered, and we'll come back and talk about what a resurrection-centric faith looks like. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, if you've wondered how so many evangelicals can vote for Donald Trump, you are not alone. Many commentators admit that it is one of the most puzzling aspects of the 2016 presidential campaign. Donald Trump lost the evangelical vote to Ted Cruz in Iowa, but he's done well with evangelical voters ever since. Ralph Reed, in a recent column, attempts to bring some light to the subject. He first explains that Donald Trump isn't doing any better among evangelical voters than previous Republican presidential candidates like John McCain and Mitt Romney. He's been winning about 1/3 of evangelicals. Reed also reminds us that evangelicals don't vote solely based on abortion and gay rights. A recent survey of evangelical voters found that their primary issues were the economy, 26%, terrorism, 21%, and immigration, 9%. It's also worth noting that evangelical voters don't cast their ballots based only on the religious commitment of the candidate. In 1980, the voters could choose between the religious Southern Baptist Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, who rarely attended church and became the first divorced man to occupy the White House. Evangelicals admired Reagan's pro-life stand and socially conservative values. Reed says the deepest crack running through the Republican electorate is not religion but class. Donald Trump's strongest support comes from white voters without four-year college degrees, especially blue-collar evangelicals. They are responding to their economic circumstances and resonate with Donald Trump's pledge to bring jobs back to America and to stop illegal immigration. We might also add that they also resonate with his claim to be pro-life and his desire to protect religious liberty. Moreover, they're convinced that Washington is broken. That is why the two insurgent candidates, Trump and Cruz, have done so well this election season. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Columbia Pictures and Affirm Films, Miracles from Heaven. How do we explain the impossible? Now playing rated PG, miraclesfromheaven-movie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in studio with us today Dr. Jeremiah Johnston, again, New Testament scholar, an individual that teaches at Houston Baptist University, and also an individual who's been very much involved in a variety of other aspects as well, including Christians Thinker Society. We'll get into some of that a little bit later, and we have links to all of that on our website. But for just a few minutes, Dr. Johnston, let's, if we can, talk about some of the evidence for a resurrection-centric faith. And again, bring us back to the culture, because the first eyewitnesses to the resurrection are women. What's the problem with that, if indeed you were trying to put together a hoax?
Well, first, sorry to all the ladies out there, but it's so important that we don't read our modern understanding of culture back into the scripture, and we try to foist the United States or the Western Hemisphere into the Bible. In the scriptural times, women were not credible witnesses. They just simply weren't. And so the fact that the scriptures open themselves up to, specifically now I'm thinking about the gospel accounts, because interestingly enough, the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, he doesn't bring up the female witnesses. That's our earliest source, but the gospel writers do. And this is powerful to me. In Luke chapter 8, Kerby, we learn that women supplied Jesus' financial needs. Right. Even the Son of God had financial needs in his ministry. He didn't just create money. He had women that followed him that supplied for his ministry.
That's true.
Those are the same women in Luke chapter 24 who are the first eyewitnesses of the resurrection. This is what I love about Jesus Christ. He empowered women. We see that women were the last at the cross. They were the first at the tomb. And this is where I really try to respond respectfully, but to people that don't understand Jewish burial traditions. That's one of the most important evidential lines as it relates to a resurrection-centric faith, because you have those out there like the apostate Bart Ehrman or John Dominic Crossan or the late Marcus Borg, who founders, these people are involved in the Jesus Seminar. Marcus Borg thought that Jesus was a Buddhist. He now knows that he is not a Buddhist. These people said, Jesus' body was probably not buried, or buried in a shallow grave and eaten by dogs or birds. And respectfully, there is no way that can be the case. When you look at the Jewish culture during peacetime of the first century, there is no doubt that Jesus was buried in a known grave. His disciples, led by the women, knew the place of his burial. If the Sanhedrin sentenced him to death, that's why they had to find a place of burial, not an honorable burial, but a proper burial. That's why we see Joseph of Arimathea asking for the body. The entire juridical procedure, Kerby, is exactly what we know through Josephus, Philo, and other extra-biblical sources.
Some people have seen movies like Risen, which I think really help you understand, again, that it wasn't just tossed away because it was protected. But then again, like you said, the least credible witnesses are the ones we read about in the Gospels. And so if you're trying to come up with a myth, the so-called Passover plot, doesn't work very well, does it?
No, and let me give you an example for my audience. I'm a specialist in 2nd century Christianity. Celsus and Porphyry and other these would be like the new atheists of the 2nd century for benefit of our audience. They ridiculed the Christian faith because it rested on the testimony of women. And so what do we have with what we call apocryphal or extra-canonical literature in early Christianity? We have a gospel like the Gospel of Peter. You haven't heard about it. It's not canonical. It's not in the New Testament. It's not part of the accepted books. But what did the Gospel of Peter do? Again, Peter didn't write it. The author of this begins to say that even Pilate sees the resurrected Jesus. Roman officials, high priests see the resurrected Jesus, and they completely remove women out of it. So they try to respond to that objection that they're getting. And this is what makes the gospel so believable to me, that they open themselves up to this more sober narrative, even embarrassing. And as you rightly point, there were other messianic pretenders and contenders of the first century. They promised different miracles after their death, and all of their movements died.
Right.
The biggest question that I would ask a critic of Christianity is, why are there any Christians in the first place? Why didn't they just go back to being Jews? In the first, and we look at Luke 24:21, those two on the road to Emmaus, they said, we had hoped.
Yeah.
He was the Messiah.
Well, and that's another very compelling argument, and that is, if indeed this is some kind of myth, and of course we read about that even in the Gospel of Matthew, that the Jews, since they didn't know what happened, said that the disciples stole the body. But Dr. Johnston, the first problem we've got is that then they go and preach on Pentecost in the very city where Jesus was crucified and where they said he was risen. And then you follow the lives of each one of those individuals. And we're going to get Sean McDowell on because he's done something recently on just what happened to each one of those disciples. And with the exception maybe of the Apostle John, all of them died horrible martyrs' deaths. And again, like you said, why are there any Christians if indeed this was simply a big hoax?
Exactly. And at that Pentecost sermon, think about it, see it in your mind, 50 days after the resurrection, after the Passover weekend, Peter stands up and he preaches with boldness. This was a man who had failed. And this gives us great encouragement in our Christian walk, doesn't it? He had turned away from the faith, and yet he met the resurrected Jesus in Luke chapter 24, and we read about it at the end of John's Gospel. And what does he say? He says, we were all witnesses of his resurrection. And there were Jews in the audience. There were definitely objectors in the audience. He says, and this is what I love about Christianity. And I say this, when I hold the Bible in my hand, Kerby, I don't read this uncritically. I read this as a critical scholar. And what's amazing about it is that we can trust it. It exhibits verisimilitude with the first century world of Jesus. And this is what I say to the skeptic. If you don't use the Gospels, archaeologists will. Archaeologists who are secularists, some of them are atheists, they will use the Gospels, the canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, in their archaeological digs. Now, that says something powerful to me.
I think so. Now, again, one of the other aspects of this is just the credible witness of the Gospels, because you have the four Gospels, and I might just mention you've written a scholarly piece as well as about Peter and the resurrection and all the rest, but when you look at this, you always hear people, Dr. Johnston, saying, well, what about about the errors, or the contradictions in the Bible. And first of all, whenever they ask about that, I say, well, can you name one? And lots of times I get this kind of blank stare, deer in the headlights look. But even if they do, most of those are easily resolvable. And it's, I think, helpful that as you put those Gospels together, you get a fuller picture, because each one was looking at it with a different set of eyes, with a different intent to try to communicate that. And a lot of people say, why 4 Gospels? Well, because each one was written for a different reason by a different person. And when we put it together, they're not contradictory, they are complementary, aren't they?
That's exactly right. They are complementary, and a discrepancy doesn't automatically equate to a contradiction. It's very important that, as a critical scholar of the first century, if I had 4 documents that were all identical, that were perfectly harmonized, I would immediately put those in question.
Looks
I mean,
like a forgery.
If we walk out today, and if we unfortunately saw a car accident, we would have a different take. Were there 3 or 2 in the car? Well, I think there were 2, and you might have thought you saw 3, but nonetheless, a car accident happened. We could be witnesses of it. And so, this exhibits veracity to me in the gospel accounts. And yes, we have the Gospels, we have the book of Acts, but then when we look at 1 Corinthians, especially as it relates to the resurrection of Jesus, 1 Corinthians is dated perhaps even 20 years earlier. If I use the liberal dating of the Gospels, we have Corinthians written in AD 53, just 25 years after the resurrection event itself. That's pretty close to the testimony that we need for the resurrection.
We come back, we're going to continue our conversation today with Dr. Jeremiah Johnston. And again, a lot of what we're talking about comes from chapter 2 of his book, Unanswered, Lasting Truth for Trending Questions, and really an attempt to try to answer many of the questions that you have. And I would certainly commend it to you, because it's a great resource, one that I've used not only to deal with these issues, the body of proof, but also issues from as different as mental health and suicide, and maybe even the silence of God and the paranormal and many other very important issues. And again, we have information that will take you to Lifeway so that you can get that whole Bible study kit that I know you'll want to have access to as well. But before we go to the break, I do have a special request for many of you. This has been, of course, a very critical issue of talking about not only the election, but all these various apologetic and worldview issues. And we're certainly working hard to help people across the nation apply biblical truth to their lives and the culture. And so giving to Point of View right now has had an unexpected drop. And so we want to encourage some of you to consider what you might do to help us out. This is certainly not a time to pull back. It's a time when the American people need biblical truth and insight. And so if you can help us out, we would greatly appreciate it. Visit our website today, pointofview.net, and that's where you can make a donation. Or, of course, you can also mail a check and make it out to Point of View to Post Office Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. I might add, it isn't often that you hear me talk about financial resources, and so we certainly hope you understand how important it is right now as we come to this time of the year for you to help us, and we certainly want to thank you for standing with us as we try to restore Christ in our culture. So again, the website is pointofview.net, and of course the address is Post Office Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. As you go there, you can not only make a donation, click on that donate button, but we also have our Pray, Organize, and Vote material, and we have lots of information about Dr. Jeremiah Johnston and Lifeway and this Unanswered series. So it's a great place for you to visit. And as we go to a break, it would be a great time to visit the website and make a donation and find some of those resources. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after these important messages.
Is it just me, or does this year's election seem more contentious than ever? Even Christians are divided between which candidate to support, but one thing we must agree upon is the need to pray together. Each and every one of us must be on our knees asking God's mercy. Who is the right one to name the next Supreme Court justice, or 2 or 3? Honestly, I don't know, but God does, and we must petition Him to act. Point of View has created its own campaign in the midst of the presidential campaign, Pray, Organize, Vote. We want to remind you of things to pray about. We want to help you educate fellow believers and get them out to vote. Sign up today at pointofview.net. Click on the banner, Pray, Organize, and Vote. The future of America is at stake, and God's people are called to be good stewards of our votes. After you sign up, look at the bottom right corner for the red box that says Donate. Your gift will educate and motivate Christians during this critical time. Don't put it off. Visit now, pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation in studio today with Dr. Jeremiah Johnston. Again, he is a New Testament scholar, apologist, a sought-after speaker, and author of a number of books, one of which we've been talking about, Unanswered, and focusing primarily on chapter 2 and the resurrection. And we've talked a little bit about this idea of the evidence for a resurrection-centric faith in terms of the eyewitness of the women, in terms of the burial customs. There's something that I've run into over the years speaking on college campuses, and it's been interesting to see people even trying to make this argument. Faculty Commons, which is the faculty ministry of Cru, Campus Crusade, and they would post oftentimes on a newspaper around Easter that we believe in the resurrection, and you'd have all sorts of pastors saying that we believe in the resurrection. Well, then the skeptic professors began to come up there and say, well, the resurrection's a hoax. Jesus didn't really die. And so after a while, this idea that, as you well know, is an ancient, it's a really long-term idea of the so-called Passover plot is out there. Now, I don't know how anybody could still hold to that if anybody even saw the movie The Passion of the Christ.
Exactly.
But talk about that for just a minute, because we've talked about the changed lives of the disciples. It's hard to imagine that if indeed this was some kind of hoax, that this completely emaciated and crucified individual somehow woke up in the grave and appeared to his disciples that they would see that he is the Lord of life. So how can we think about that? What do we know about the crucifixion burial customs which really set this idea aside?
Yeah, well, it's a little weird to say you're a specialist in execution, but I am in Roman execution. And we only have one record, Kerby, and that's from Josephus, where someone survives crucifixion, and they only survive for a few minutes. Josephus asked for the body of 3 who crucified victims to be led off the cross. Titus, who he asks, who becomes an emperor, immediately applies the best medical attention that the Roman Empire could provide in that moment. He's a Roman general, Titus does. 2 of them die immediately, and the third dies just a few minutes later. You did not. The Romans were experts at killing you. And if you were dying from crucifixion, in the Roman mind, you were bad. You were treasonous. You had done something against the emperor himself, most likely, trying to stand in the way of the empire. And we don't have any record of it. I'm unpersuaded by this swoon theory. And let's give people in the first century a little more credit. I mean, Jesus, as you've rightly explained, being wounded, being beyond recognizable, as we see in the early reports. Would anyone say this is a glorified, resurrected body? No, he would have needed immediate medical attention. And this is what I want to encourage our people to understand about the world in which Jesus ministered. It's a different world than the world today. In the United States, life expectancy is 79 years of age. You know what the life expectancy was in the era of Jesus, when this healer from Galilee, who Luke 7 says he raises the dead? Do you know what life expectancy was? 20 years of age. 49% of children did not see their 5th birthday. I studied a cemetery in San Pamphilo, Rome. 83 of the 111 graves were that of children.
Yes.
And so this was a culture of death. 25% of the Roman Empire was sick, dying, or in need of immediate medical attention on any given day. And so, yeah. All classes, not just the poor, not just the slave classes. Christianity grew up because it had this confident expectation in death. And Kerby, you know this because you know the Greek text, but people are always encouraged to hear this. I mean, when we drive home today later, we're probably going to drive by a cemetery. Now, think about that word cemetery. We drive by, we don't think of Christianity necessarily when we see the word cemetery. In the first century, the Romans had mausoleum, they had a sepulcher, they had a memoriam. That's what they called their burial grounds, but they didn't call them cemetery. Do you know who came up with this term cemetery? It was the Christians.
Yes.
And in Greek, koimeterion, it means sleeping rooms, dormitories. They had an expectation that they would wake up again. We're being buried in the dorm. We're going to wake up again. And Christians want to be buried together. Isn't that powerful? What an expectant look towards death. And that energized and vitalized their entire ministry, to where in Acts 17 we read, these men who have turned the world upside down have come here also.
Now, you've been to the catacombs, and that was, again, the kind of the first cemeteries, if you will,
Yes.
because, again, this was a Christian idea of the body being valuable. And it used to be, as you talk about in the book, and we've talked about this with Dr. Rodney Stark, that, a quarter of all the people, even in Rome, were malnourished.
Yes.
Many of them were died. If a body, matter of fact, there were signs saying, don't throw bodies in the street, right? Wasn't that true?
Body dumping was a huge problem. And in fact, I'm persuaded 1,500 bodies a year were dumped just in the streets and the alleyways of Rome. And so the Christians would come along and they would care for these bodies. They would take care of them even in death. And another thing that I think is admirable, I always show my students an ancient letter, Pioxy 7:44. A man is writing home to his wife. It's a love letter. And he tells his wife, I miss you, yada, yada, yada. If we have a son, name him this. If it's a daughter, throw it out. So that was the idea. You waited 8 days to name your child in the Roman Empire because, after all, you may not want it, especially if it's a girl. And the Christians came along and they rescued these children. Why? Because Jesus said, let the children come to me.
So again, this idea of resurrection is much broader than just what we talk about in Easter. Certainly, Christ is risen, but it has led to a very different view of everything from death to certainly this issue of life. Because if indeed you believe that the resurrection is true, then, as you pointed out, Christians were willing during the plague sometimes to go into the street and to care for the sick and the dying. You just mentioned talking about caring for the dead, but they would oftentimes, at risk to their own lives, do this. And this is why, in a sense, as you said in Acts 17, they turned the culture upside down, because in this world where life was cheap in the Roman Empire, they now, because they believed in the resurrection, actually demonstrated that even to the point of death.
That's exactly right. And Kerby, that encourages me today as a 21st century Christian to get off my blessed assurance and to care and get out of my comfort zone. We can't grow in our faith in our comfort zone. The resurrection drives me to support ministries like Point of View, to be an educated, informed Christian so I can go out and I can encourage the culture around me and I can take care of people's lives and I can do brave things. Why? Because of the resurrection. I know that the best of my life is still to come. And that's why, and for the benefit of our audience, you might be experiencing a death. This might be your first Easter without a loved one. I want to encourage you with the Apostle Paul's word in 1 Thessalonians 4:13 when he says, we grieve. Yes, we grieve with loved ones we've lost, but we don't grieve as those without hope. Why? Because of the resurrection.
Yes. You have been a pastor. Of course, now you're a professor, and obviously you're training future pastors. So speak to the pastors for just a minute, because, many of them might be thinking about an Easter sermon or something like that. But if I come back to your book, you're a little bit hard on some of the pastors because, we talk about how God has a wonderful plan for your life, and he does. And God wants you to have an abundant life, which he does. And God certainly wants to give you eternal life, which he does. But the argument you make here is that throughout the book of Acts, and in other places as well, in some of the Gospels and some of the epistles, you have the evidence resting on the resurrection. And there are people that I think could honestly, as they're listening right now, Dr. Johnston, say, I think the last time I heard a message on the resurrection was last Easter. Well, that isn't the way it was in the first century, is it?
No. The lifeblood of the early church was the resurrection of Jesus. And what does the Apostle Paul say? At the end of 57 amazing verses in 1 Corinthians 15, he says, therefore, key verse, if we know how to exegete scriptures, be steadfast, be vigilant, your work in the Lord, it is not in vain. And then in the very next verse, remember, it's the next chapter, get out your checkbooks. We got an offering to take. People are suffering. So the resurrection encourages and energizes every aspect of our life. And so I want to be vigilant. I want to be steadfast. The resurrection, more than any other teaching, is what brings that energy into my spiritual life.
So again, like we said, it's of first importance. That's what the scriptures say. So let's take a break. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, obviously this is one where I've encouraged you to kind of sit back and listen. But if you'd like to join the conversation, Dr. Jeremiah Johnston will be with us for a few more minutes. And so we certainly do want to give you that opportunity. 1-800-351-1212. Perhaps you have some comments about the importance of preaching about the resurrection, or maybe even some questions that you might have. We'll give you an opportunity to ask him. And most importantly, we have a very important link so that if you would like to not only look at this issue, but some of the other issues that are in his book and DVD series and study guide, we have a link to lifeway.com, and you can get the entire Bible study kit. And if you haven't already heard me say this, and some people tune in and tune out, I have used it in my own Sunday school class. We've looked at everything from the resurrection to the issue of mental health and suicide to the issue of the paranormal is becoming normal and much, much more. And I certainly would say this would be a great resource for you to use in your Bible study, your Sunday school class, or your church. So let's take a break. When we come back, we'll take some of your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212, and certainly want to encourage you to get a copy of the book as well as some of the other resources, and you can find all those on our website, pointofview.net. As you go there, you'll also find my daily commentary. We have some take action items and some videos we would encourage you to watch, so it's all available at the website, pointofview.net. We'll come back and we'll take some phone calls right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
In studio with us today, Dr. Jeremiah Johnston. If you'd like to ask a question, 1-800-351-1212. Been talking about the resurrection, but of course, as we get closer to Easter, I know some of you have those questions, so let's take our first phone call here. We'll go out to Georgia. VJ, thank you for calling today. You're on with Dr. Jeremiah Johnston.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call. I have one question about Easter egg hunt, if it has any significance in Bible. I just want to know about that. Same as Halloween. Doesn't have any significance. Why do the churches celebrate here in the U.S.?
Very good.
VJ, I completely understand why you're asking that question. For speaking as a pastor, Easter for many of our neighbors is nothing more than chocolate bunnies and Easter egg hunts, but that is an excellent way to bring people in the front door of our church. I would rather my neighbors do an Easter egg hunt at my church than anywhere else, especially in any other secular venue. And so, no, to answer your question, Halloween, Easter celebrations, these things they don't find their place in the cut and thrust of the Bible, but they are neat ways for, and I'm talking about Easter first and foremost, Easter egg hunts, not necessarily Halloween, a great way to bring people into our church.
Well, and again, one of the things that maybe is helpful is for people to understand that they aren't connected. I know that many times foreign students have asked me, what's this about the bunnies and the Easter eggs?
Yes.
And we say, well, nothing. But then come back and to say, but the resurrection, and that is kind of a good jumping off point. Even Halloween, it was All Hallows Eve, and talk about the Reformation or something. So sometimes even something that is not biblical can be a good conversation starter for evangelism, don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, this is the great faith dialogue opportunity. I mean, that's a great question, VJ, that you're going to be asked. And so now you can be ready to turn the conversation back to, well, actually, we really celebrate Resurrection Sunday, and this is why he is risen.
Well, let's take another phone call. We'll go out on the Good News Network. In this case, Cameron, what would you like to ask?
Well, I have a question regarding apologetics with Jehovah's Witnesses. My neighbor is a Jehovah's Witness, and I'm actually a seminary student myself, but I feel like I may not have covered all my bases, and we're due to have a conversation pretty soon, I'm sure.
Well, again, I think there would be a couple of ways. First of all, we have some resources on our website, and also, as you know, I work with a group called Probe Ministries, and you can go to probe.org, you'll find some resources. There's some great books and interviews that we've done over the years, but really the key issue, when whoever you're talking to, Dr. Johnston, it really gets back to the issue of who is Jesus.
Yeah.
Is Jesus the Son of God? Is Jesus divine? And Jehovah's Witness will say, well, maybe he was Michael the Archangel, something like that. So you really want to come back to this issue of Christology, don't you?
Yeah, and it's amazing how and especially these made in America cults, like Jehovah's Witnesses and like others, everybody wants to be on good terms with Jesus. Even in Islam, we see second only to the Prophet Muhammad, Isa, Jesus is more revered than anyone else. And in the Quran, Jesus is seen as a figure who will be the ultimate Muslim. He will come back in a second coming. And so, yes, we have to get back to the historical Jesus, and I'm persuaded we find that historical Jesus in the canonical Gospels.
And again, maybe the Gospel of John is a good one. And then to maybe sometimes you might want to understand how they respond to some of those. Like, for example, if you say, well, here Jesus says, I and the Father are one. Well, they'll say, yeah, but later on he says, well, you can be one with me, but it's a different Greek tense, you know. And
exactly.
more importantly, you don't have to know the Greek, because as soon as Jesus makes that statement, what happens next? Well, they start reaching for rocks, right?
That's right.
Because they want to stone him. Why do they want to stone him? Because of blasphemy. What's blasphemy? Claiming to be God when you're not. So Jesus is making some incredibly outrageous claims. Mm-hmm. And matter of fact, some individuals over the years have written about the outrageous claims of Jesus. And so in some respects, whether we come to the resurrection or we come to the arguments for the deity of Jesus Christ, I think it works pretty well, because you have Old Testament prophecy written down, telling us what the Messiah would be like, where he would be born, how he would be born, how people would react to him, his family lineage, all of that, none of which you could control. And then you have all the claims that Jesus makes. And then, of course, now back to the point of what we've been talking about, he fulfills that and establishes that with the resurrection, which is in 1 Corinthians 15.
Exactly. And I mean, you've just quoted beautifully. I mean, Jesus predicted his imminent death, burial, and resurrection. Mark 8:31, that was the first one. Mark 9:31, the second one. Mark 10:33 and 34, his third prediction. We've not talked about it yet, Kerby, but this is a wonderful on-ramp to it. We have major league skeptics who begin believing in Jesus after the resurrection. I want to bring up, how many of you in our audience have a brother? What would it take for you to believe your brother was the Son of God?
James, huh?
Yeah. And I'm talking, of course, about James, and we learned in Mark 3 they thought Jesus was out of his mind because of these claims. In Mark 6, who is this? The carpenter's son, they say in the local synagogue. John 7, none of his family believed in him. Why does James believe in Jesus? Because he shows up and he says, bro, look at my hands and my feet.
Yes.
I'm alive. Pretty powerful.
I would say so. Just before we run out of time, let's talk about some of the resources. Of course, we have the link to Lifeway, but I would be remiss, since you are a professor at Houston Baptist University, if some of our listeners would like to get an education. It is great if they can come to Houston, but there is now a way in which they can be educated even where they are. So talk about some of the resources that are available at your university.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Kerby. We have a full online apologetics program that is second to none. It is first class, and and I'm not just saying this because I'm on faculty. I knew this before I went to the faculty of HBU. The Lord has used our president, Dr. Robert Sloan, to bring together the finest minds, and that's why I've been talking to Kerby over break that he needs to teach for us as well. We have Lee Strobel, we have William Lane Craig, we have Nancy Piercy, Mary Jo Sharp, and a host of others who teach and give value to that apologetics program. So you're not just learning from a scholar, you're learning from people that write the books, that do the debates. And so, yeah, come on with us. And if you don't want to take it for credit, audit it with us. And then very soon we have a certificate launching with Lifeway. It's non-credit, but it's on-pace, self-directed, and available 24 hours a day.
I think it's hbu.edu, right?
Yes, sir.
Very simple. And again, everyone you mentioned there has been on the program, and so have you by phone, but today it's been great to have you in studio as well.
Well, thank you, Kerby. Thanks for having me.
Dr. Jeremiah Johnston, and again, let me encourage you to get some of the material that we have on our website, pointofview.net. That Unanswered series is one I know you're going to find very helpful. There's the book, there's the study guide, there's the DVD, and I'm even at high praise because it's been so. But just as I mentioned before we go to the break, there's been a very critical issue for the nation this year. Sources, and we'll be talking about the elections taking place today, for example, in Utah and Arizona. Whether it's politics or evangelism or apologetics or theology or philosophy or family, biblical truth, all of it very important. And so again, we're working hard to really help people across the nation apply biblical truth to every area of their life and to the culture. So again, we encourage you to support this ministry. And one of the reasons I'm bringing this up is that we've had an unexpected drop in the amount of giving that has come to Point of View over the last couple of weeks. And this is really not a time to pull back. It's a time when the American people need biblical truth and insight into how to apply that truth to the culture more than ever before. So I would just ask you right now, maybe to take a moment to go online to our website, pointofview.net. Click on that donate button. Or, of course, you can also mail a check and make it out to Point of View, Post Office Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Isn't too often you've heard me talk about this, but I think you might understand that it's important, and we certainly would hope that you would stand with us as we go to a break right now. In just a minute, we're going to have Bill Purvis in studio. That's going to be a great interview as well. Make a break for it, unleashing the power of personal and spiritual growth. But as we go to a break, this would be a great time for you to visit the website, pointofview.net. Have that button that says Donate Now. Just click on that, and you can make a secure gift to us, or if you'd like to write to us, of course, make it out to Point of View and send it to Point of View, Post Office Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Wouldn't ask if we didn't have a need, and if you can help us out during this time of year, that would be greatly appreciated. Been privileged to have Dr. Jeremiah Johnston in studio. Bill Purvis coming up next, and that all happens right after these important messages.
Later this year, for the 58th time, America will choose a president. As a Christian, what are you doing to prepare for the election? Helping you cut through the major media spin is part of the mission of Point of View. We want to provide the best election resources, including a new website, Pray, Organize, Vote, encouraging people to intercede for the upcoming election, to help you get registered so you can exercise the stewardship of voting, to share things to help you get people involved and out to the polls. But to do all of that, we need you to vote right now with your support for Point of View. Show us that you're in this for the long haul as a citizen of heaven as well as the United States. Click Donate Now at the top of the page and give the most generous one-time gift you can at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. There is a lot of work to be done. Let's get to it together. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
So now we're going to spend some time talking about change. How can you change some of the things in your life? And are you resistant to change? Or are there really ways in which you can maybe begin to unleash the power of personal and spiritual growth? That is the subtitle of the book. Make a break for it. This book has just come out today. So this is really lots of fun. And the author is in studio with me as well, Bill Purvis. He is a pastor at Cascade Hills Church in Columbus, Georgia, and actually started with no salary and 32 people in the pews, but it's grown to at least 8,000, many people have told me, and this book is just out today. So, Bill, congratulations.
Thank you. Honored to be with you today, Kerby. It's my pleasure.
It's published by Zondervan, and we have a link to your website so people can order it. I always encourage people to try to find these books in their bookstore, but since it just came out today, they might have to wait a day or two, unless Zondervan was really quick on getting them out there, because this is the release date, and I'm glad that you gave us one of the first interviews.
Hey, I am too. I wouldn't think of anything better. In fact, you've got an outstanding audience, and I know they participate, and I know they care about people, and that's the reason I wrote the book.
And I might just mention, you used to listen to Marlon Maddox.
I did. That ages me some, but what a fantastic voice, and I'm glad to see that the legacy and the ministry is still going on well today.
I met Marlon Maddox 35, almost 40 years ago, and then 30 years ago, actually, I had an opportunity to be sitting with him, and that is, I at that time was teaching at Dallas Seminary, and I was teaching a media course, and I'd asked Marlon to speak. He's one of the speakers, and he called up the day before, and I thought, he's calling to cancel, but he said, no, I mean, I'm glad you speak in your class, but I want to trade. I want you to come and be a guest host on my show, and I came in, and that was in 1986. So you can kind of figure out that's 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And I hit most of the breaks, and he said, would you like to do this more often? I said, well, I do have a day job. He said, yeah, I'm not asking every day. And of course, then when he went to be with the Lord more than 12 years ago, I've taken it over. And so we all know the legacy of Marlon Maddox.
That's right.
And that's one of the reasons why I try to do a good job. I don't want to mess up. This guy really started something, and we're still continuing it here to this day.
Well, you'd still make him proud, I promise you that.
Yes. Well, it's just thrilling to have you here. And I might just mention that John Maxwell, one of the many people that endorsed this book, of course, I've known him and interviewed him, and he said, finally, my good friend Bill Purvis has put his amazing life story into print. I encouraged him to do this years ago. Bill's story of how he turned this mess into his message will hold your attention to the very last page. Read the first chapter and you'll be hooked, and I'll agree, because we're going to talk about that for just a minute. We want to put this in the hands of anyone needing an encouraging message that life change is possible. And this book is one that I know every Christian will benefit, but you're hoping that this book will be used by Christians to hand to non-Christians.
Yes, absolutely. I believe that what it will do is it will open the door for people that want to have a conversation with somebody that doesn't know God or has put God off or run from God or been far from God.
Yes.
And I found that out. In fact, what was interesting, the other night I was in Canada, and they gave me the first copy. The man that I did the interview with had a copy. He handed me the copy and said, Bill, I've got it before you did. And I said, thank you. And I said, can I have it? Because I want the first copy. I'll send you back one autographed. He said, good. Now, I've heard these stories about people on airplanes, and everybody gets saved, and the pilot pulls over and they plant a church and all that, and I've never had that. I normally put a headset on and talk if the door opens. But I got on the plane, and the guy beside me and I were sitting there minding our own business and not talking to each other. And all of a sudden, he leaned over and said, that's a Christian book, isn't it? And I said, yes, sir. He said, I was kind of glancing over your shoulder, and then he said, I need God. He said, my life's falling apart. He said, I've been running from God for a long time. And I said, really? And he opened up and said his wife of 17 years had just left him. He had a 12-year-old daughter. He said on top of that he just found that he's been embezzled by his partner in business. He was flying back from Canada to go to Los Angeles to try to put his life back together. He said, I've been praying for the last 4 days. God, I'm tired of running. I want to turn to you now. So I had the chance to share with him. I gave him my book. I even said, I'm the author of the book. I want to give it to you. And I signed the first copy. He said, no, you can't do that. I said, yes. And I felt like when I left the plane, Kerby, that God was saying, that's where I want it. I want that book in the hands of people that don't know God or far from God. And so that was, what better way to plant the first seed and put it in the place it ought to be.
Yeah. The first chapter is a grabber, and it's one that I've heard about before. But I know that some people might know you, but if they don't, can you tell your story? Because it is incredible. Getting stabbed 3 times, probably should have died, and in the midst of that, coming to know the Lord. Tell the story. If you
should have. I was one of those aimless guys. I had heard the gospel, and I'd had some people tell me before that Jesus Christ died for my sins, that he took the wrath of God for my sin. They'd told me that, but they left off part. They didn't tell me I could invite him into my heart. They didn't tell me that I could pray and receive him. They just told me the facts of it. So I knew the facts. Well, there came a time, though, that suddenly 2 weeks before I became a Christian, some guy had gone to church, a teenage boy, and someone there said, go tell somebody that needs God about God. And he got me on his heart. He came to my door, knocked on the door, and he was very nervous. When he knocked on the door and I opened it, he looked at me and he said, Bill, and then he started stuttering. He said, everything you're looking for can be found in Jesus. And then he just looked at me with wide eyes and said, I got to go. And apparently he got the burden off him by sharing that with me. But little did I know that when he said those words, he planted a seed in my heart. It's almost like, you know, when you get a song in your head from the radio and you can't get the song out of your mind.
Right.
For 2 weeks, Kerby, those words stayed with me. Everything you're looking for can be found in Jesus. And so while they sounded simplistic, the truth was, it was what I was looking for. I was looking for peace and purpose in life, and I found that. What was crazy is 2 weeks after that, I was riding around the street in Columbus, Georgia with a friend of mine. We were aimless. I'd reached a place in my life I was aimless and empty and didn't know where to go or what to do with my life. And I saw a prostitute on the side of the street. I had never been with a prostitute before. I turned to my friend and said, have you ever done this before? He said, no. I said, let's try it. And I wanted to just try a new adventure. I was filling the empty hole in my soul. So I turned around, started talking to her. A pimp came out of the bushes behind her. Come to find out later, it was her husband. And her husband had been in prison, and he had had a plan to put his wife on the street corner and to find 2 gullible-looking, dumb boys that had perhaps some money, and he was going to rob them and even kill them. And so we fit the bill. We were gullible and dumb and had a little bit of money. We all 4 got in the car, drove about 3 or 4 blocks away, pulled into a house, a parking lot right behind a house, and he directed me and the girl to go in the house. So she and I got out and went in, and he waited in the car with my friend. We go into the house, and I lock the door behind me, and we're in a little bitty room, and there's another door going into the rest of the house. There's a little bed to the side and a hanging light on a string. So I get fully undressed. I'm 17 years old. I'm following through everything that I thought I wanted to do and things that she'd guided me to do. I get fully undressed, and she does too. And about the time she turns the light off, what I didn't know is the man in the car, her husband, got out of the car where my friend was, and he said, I'll be back in a minute. I'm going to smoke a cigarette. He walked around the front of the house, walked through, stopped by the kitchen, picked up a butcher knife. The blade on that knife was 9.5 inches long. When she turned the light off, that was his signal to step in the room. He stepped into the room at that moment. Then she turned the light back on. When she did, he's standing in front of me. His first words to me were, now you're going to die. Before I knew it, he swung the knife. It stabbed me in my chest. Went 1/8 of an inch below my heart, came out my back. The only thing that stopped it was the handle of the knife against my chest. Before I had a chance to move, he swung it the second time. This time it was coming to my eye, but I backed up, and it went into my throat.
Jugular vein.
Yes, went in one side, came out the other, cut my jugular vein completely in half. As far as I know, I'm one of the few people that have lived with that. You should die or bleed out within a matter of minutes. And then I knocked him down, stepped over him. We've gotten into a fight. I was trying to get out as quickly as I could. My life was turning upside down. As I jumped over, and he stabbed me the 3rd time in the liver. Now I knew that I was going to die. The fact is that my life was over almost. I ran out the street, and I prayed and invited Jesus. Actually, I heard those words, everything you're looking for can be found in Jesus. That was when I cried out to God at that moment.
A lot more to say, but we're going to take a break, and we'll finish that off right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, if you've wondered how so many evangelicals can vote for Donald Trump, you are not alone. Many commentators admit that it is one of the most puzzling aspects of the 2016 presidential campaign. Donald Trump lost the evangelical vote to Ted Cruz in Iowa, but he's done well with evangelical voters ever since. Ralph Reed, in a recent column, attempts to bring some light to the subject. He first explains that Donald Trump isn't doing any better among evangelical voters than previous Republican presidential candidates like John McCain and Mitt Romney. He's been winning about 1/3 of evangelicals. Reed also reminds us that evangelicals don't vote solely based on abortion and gay rights. A recent survey of evangelical voters found that their primary issues were the economy, 26%, terrorism, 21%, and immigration, 9%. It's also worth noting that evangelical voters don't cast their ballots based only on the religious commitment of the candidate. In 1980, the voters could choose between the religious Southern Baptist Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, who rarely attended church and became the first divorced man to occupy the White House. Evangelicals admired Reagan's pro-life stand and socially conservative values. Reed says the deepest crack running through the Republican electorate is not religion but class. Donald Trump's strongest support comes from white voters without four-year college degrees, especially blue-collar evangelicals. They are responding to their economic circumstances and resonate with Donald Trump's pledge to bring jobs back to America and to stop illegal immigration. We might also add that they also resonate with his claim to be pro-life and his desire to protect religious liberty. Moreover, they're convinced that Washington is broken. That is why the two insurgent candidates, Trump and Cruz, have done so well this election season. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Columbia Pictures and Affirm Films, Miracles from Heaven. How do we explain the impossible? Now playing, rated PG, miraclesfromheaven-movie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
New book just out, Make a Break for It. Bill Purvis with us today, and if you would like to know more about it, we have a link to his website. Of course, you can probably look for it in your local bookstore, but it's just out today, so you might have to wait a day or two. And you were great. This is like old-time radio, cliffhanger.
Yeah.
You know, okay, we got you stabbed, we got you out the door, but then what happened? Because most people, when they've been stabbed 3 times, especially through the jugular, that's it. You know, it's a death sentence.
That's
so
right.
you jump into the car, you look like something out of a horror film.
Right.
You make it to the hospital just barely on adrenaline.
Right.
And tell the rest of the story.
Here was what was interesting. When I ran out of the house, I hit the hood of the car where my friend was at and screamed, "Get out of here." I ran about 30 feet. I fell at a light pole, grabbed hold of this light pole, and just slid down it. I was bleeding, and my friend was cranking up the car to turn around to pick me up. And that was when I heard those words, "Everything you're looking for can be found in Jesus." Yes. Those words were the loudest words I heard. I knew right then and there I needed to call on God. I wanted to call on God, so I did. I prayed a simple prayer. I just cried out from the sincerest, most desperate heart. I said, "Jesus, come into my life. Forgive my sin. Come into my life." And that's what I prayed. Now, my friend backs the car up. I jump in. He takes me to the emergency room, which happens to be only a half a block away.
Yes.
There's a cardiovascular surgeon, the best one in all the city, that happens to be there that night. He was there on call, and then there were 2 other surgeons. One was a Vietnam trauma surgeon. All 3 of them just kind of woke up, and everything kicked into high gear the moment I came in. I ran in the emergency room. They grabbed me, threw me on a gurney, pushed me in a room. First words out of his mouth was, he said, "Get the district attorney up here. This young man's been stabbed to death." He said, "He's not dead yet, but he'll be dead before he gets here. His jugular vein's completely severed." They were doing surgery. They started doing surgery before I could even go out. And as I was going out, I went to sleep and woke up 11 and a half hours later.
Yes.
I'm in an emergency room, or in a convalescent wing there, the intensive care. I see machines and doctors walking in and out and nurses there. And Kerby, here's where I was at that point. I realized it wasn't a dream. It really happened. And then I began to think about what I did and relive those moments. And when I thought about running out in the street and inviting Jesus into my life, here's the part I can sincerely tell you. While all the other was traumatic and graphic, I felt so unworthy because I was lost. I was far from God. So I prayed my second prayer and I said, God, listen, thank you for what you did last night, but you don't know what you got. And if you never want to answer another prayer of mine, you don't have to. I'll never bother you again. I really don't deserve even what you've already done. And I felt that way.
Yeah.
I sensed in my spirit that God was kind of laughing, that it was almost as if a heavenly wink, that you don't know yet what plans I have for you.
Yeah, you had no idea what the plans would be.
No.
Starting a church and all the things that you've done
all
over
the
years.
things. I got this hunger for the Bible. My friends would come in to see me, and they would ask me, I can't wait till you get out and what we can do again. And I would say, no, you don't understand. On the outside, I'm the same guy, but on the inside, somebody's living in me, and they don't want to do what I used to do. I said, I want to go and get forgiveness from people. I want to make some wrongs right. I want to go to church. I want to read a Bible. And they were putting it off on. They were saying, yeah, but Bill, we went to youth camp and it lasted 2 weeks. It won't last. Or one of them said, you lost too much blood. You're not thinking right. But I really had a change. Yeah. There was a Gideon Bible in the nightstand.
I love this story. Yeah. This is a great story because you didn't know what the word Psalms meant,
no,
right? Yeah.
I didn't know anything of the Bible. I didn't know who came where, what. And, people call Job Job. Well, I called Psalm spasms.
Spasms. I just laughed when I read that.
Yeah, I had a nurse that would come in every day and read the Bible to me.
Spasms, yeah.
Yeah, she would read the Bible to me 30 minutes before her shift. And I'd say, I was reading spasms today. And she'd say, what? I'd say spasms. And she said, that's Psalms. She even said, you're the greenest person I ever knew. I was a blank slate. And she just guided me. In fact, she's still alive today, and she writes me a letter every now and then. And just a great experience. I came out of the hospital so hungry for God and I couldn't get enough of it. And I didn't take any witnessing classes, but I just started going to my friends and telling them about what God did for me.
Right.
And little by little, they would come to Christ, and their lives are still changed. Many of them in ministry today, and God's blessed their lives and families. And I just knew I fell in love with God. And that's been all those years, and it's still there. I'll tell you something that's really cool, though, I think you'll like. I never told anybody this, but I would go back on April the 28th every year to that very same light pole that I got saved at. And I would kneel down publicly and I would pray there. And I would spend time just thanking God for saving me. And I did that for 20 years or more. And what took place is that one time, actually, I was here in Dallas, Texas. I was speaking in Dallas for 3 nights in a row, and I realized it was April 28th. I got on a plane. I flew back to Atlanta and then another plane to Columbus. Got a taxi cab, went over there, made the driver wait while I got out and just prayed. Got back in the cab, went back to Columbus, back to Atlanta, back here to Dallas, and spoke again that night. And nobody knew it but my wife all those years. And about 2 years ago, the hospital that happened to be right there where the parking lot was at bought all of that space, and they're destroying it and demolishing it and renovating. And one of the doctors said, I don't know what it is, but that pastor, that mega church down there comes out there, and there's something with him at that light pole. So they all called me, got me on a conference call, want to know what the special thing about the pole was, and I told them. They said, would you like to have that pole?
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah, so I took the pole, they gave it as a gift, told our church, and about 11 construction men made a site on our church property that's a prayer garden. It's in the center of it. It's got now this inscription that says, on April 28, 1974, our pastor in desperation cried out to God and received a life change. And if you're here today in desperation and cry out to Jesus, perhaps he'll give you yours too. And people at all hours of the day or night will be out there praying at that place. So God used that. I wanted to be like, when Jesus healed 10 lepers and one came back and said thank you.
Right.
I wanted to be the one that never forgot to say thank you. So that's been the story of it and how God's blessed it. And the book for me has been an opportunity to not only help people to see the favor of God, but to put it in the hands of somebody that doesn't know God so they can get an opportunity to have a conversation, perhaps to open their heart, or in some ways to be for them a tool they can use to bring them to Christ.
Let's talk a little bit about the book, because obviously you tell the story and it's gripping and it gets everybody involved, but then you go in and really help people understand about change, that they're a masterpiece, that the importance of prayer, the importance of vision, the importance of mentors and all of that. So really this is a book that whether they know your story or not would be fascinated, because this helps them begin to understand how they can bring about change in their life.
Absolutely. And you'll even notice on the cover of the book, instead of putting a knife on there, I used a crab shell and a crab. And there's a reason for that. If you look at a crab, sometimes if you're walking on the beach, you'll see a lot of empty crab shells. And we think that means the crab is dead. Many times it doesn't. It means the crab is alive. A crab molts, generally will molt 8 to 11 times in its lifetime. It reaches a place where its hard shell protects it, and then it has to make a choice to change. It will take in enough fluid that it expands and it breaks out of the shell. But if it doesn't break out of that shell and change, it will die in that shell. If it breaks out, it's vulnerable. Predators now can come and attack it because it doesn't have a hard shell to hide in. But it has to take the risk. Do I change and die and risk living, or do I not change and die? And so I use that as the picture to show that changes are what we get to do. And yes, they're risky, and sure, they're scary. But you make those changes, and that's where you find the favor of God. And it's also a walk by faith.
And you make a real distinction between crabs and chameleons.
Yes.
And dreamers and schemers. So I'm going to encourage people to get something to write with and take some notes as we go through a few of these ideas. But as you say, crabs seek growth and are willing to risk vulnerability and discomfort to achieve it. But chameleons just seek security and are willing to adapt outwardly to get it. A crab wants to make progress, is willing to persevere, is willing to choose the hard path. A chameleon is willing to choose the easy path, unwilling to pursue growth. And so this is really a book all about change and growth, and again, unleashing the power of personal and spiritual growth. And not surprising, your good friend John Maxwell endorses the book. So let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get a little bit into the book as well, because we've spent a fair amount of time today certainly telling the story, and that first chapter will get everybody's attention. But when we come back, let's spend some time talking about change. And as you've heard me say, but let me mention again before we go to the break, we just again want to have you consider what you might do to support this ministry. We've had kind of an unexpected drop in giving, and during this Easter week, just thought it would be a good idea to say this is not a time to pull back. This is a time certainly for us to continue to bring biblical truth. And you've heard us talk a little bit about the legacy, first of Marlon Maddox, all the way back to 1972 up to our day today, in which we're seeing the impact of point of view. So again, let me challenge you to go to our website today. You can find out a little bit more about Bill Purvis by going to the website, pointofview.net. That will take you to his website. But also we have a Donate Now button, and I would encourage some of you to consider clicking on that button and helping us out. Or, of course, if you'd like to write to us, the address is very simple. It is Point of View, Post Office Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. While you're there, of course, you can find out more about the book, Make a Break for It, Unleashing the Power of Personal and Spiritual Growth. It is published by Zondervan, and you should be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we've made it possible for you to order it off of Bill's website. And, of course, you can find out more about his website, which is, again, billpurvis.com. If you don't know how to spell it, we've got it all right there. So everything you need is on the website, pointofview.net. And as you go to the break, this would be a great time for you to also go to the website and click on that button that says Donate Now. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll take some of your phone calls if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212, or I'll sit back, take some notes, and figure out how to bring about change in your life. All that coming up right after this.
Is it just me, or does this year's election seem more contentious than ever? Even Christians are divided between which candidate to support, but one thing we must agree upon is the need to pray together. Each and every one of us must be on our knees asking God's mercy. Who is the right one to name the next Supreme Court justice, or 2 or 3? Honestly, I don't know, but God does. And we must petition Him to act. Point of View has created its own campaign in the midst of the presidential campaign, Pray, Organize, Vote. We want to remind you of things to pray about. We want to help you educate fellow believers and get them out to vote. Sign up today at pointofview.net. Click on the banner, Pray, Organize, and Vote. The future of America is at stake, and God's people are called to be good stewards of our votes. After you sign up, look at the bottom right corner for the red box that says Donate. Your gift will educate and motivate Christians during this critical time. Don't put it off. Visit now, pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Privileged to have in studio with us today Bill Purvis, and this is an opportunity for you to know a little bit more about his book, Make a Break for It. And it really is a life-changing book that will show you how God can redirect your life towards something bigger than you can ever imagine. And as we've sometimes said, don't wait till you're at death's door to then make this decision. That was certainly your testimony.
That's right.
But I'd love to, for just a minute, before we get back to the book, talk about your website, billpurvis.com. We have a number of people, Bill, that are in ministry of some sort. They may be a pastor, they may be a Bible fellowship leader, a Sunday school leader, and they've got a lot of resources that you have there that I think would be very helpful to our listeners. So what would they find when they land on that website?
You'll find I do a lot of preaching, expository preaching, just verse by verse. I let the Bible do the work. I found out that works a whole lot better than me trying to. And so they may find a lot of that, different books of the Bible you can go through. I try to be, and my gift is more of a communicator. They say sometimes an educator can take something that is simple and make it complicated, and a communicator can take something complicated and make it simple. My goal is to try to reach the common person, the person that has no biblical knowledge, and to help them to kind of bridge that gap to the people walking in their doors. So if I'm a pastor, I have a lot of pastors all the time say, well, Brother Bill, I preach your sermons all the time. And I say, well, I'm glad, and the good news about that is if it works, and usually they'll make them better, utilize those to help them. Our church has grown from 32 to the thousands it has today. Last year in 2015, we baptized somebody every single day of the year. And that was not something that we planned to do. It's just people getting under conviction. I found the Holy Spirit does the work. So with our website, there are all kind of resources. Marriage is one of them that we do some things on. My wife and I have been married now for 35 years. I've never loved anybody at the level I loved her and never deserved her. She was a virgin, high school, homecoming queen, everything different from what I was used to. And when I met her, she taught me really the prayer life. She would live, and my kids even say they have never known a day they woke up, went to school, or any time that mom wasn't up first praying and reading the Word. And so just a godly young lady, and we began to teach marriage retreats. They sell out as fast as we announce them. We just got back from one with about 75 couples. The moment we announce it, they show up. But our goal is to try to get the family back to doing what the Bible teaches, putting husband and wife in the place they ought to be. And I believe also in ministry, I always say give the best to the people that are going to cry the deepest at your funeral. And so you take care of your family and let God build and reach them. That will become your best platform to be able to share the gospel. People will look at what you have and want part of that. So the website will cover a lot of those different areas. The subjects we address are those addresses that are those needs that we feel like are out there that are relevant at the moment. And we're not hearing a lot of, from Hollywood, you're not hearing how to build a good home, how to build a good family. And the culture's not giving it, so we wanted to give that and provide it.
Yeah. So again, listen to Bill and Debbie as they talk about this. And if for those of you in Georgia, you can find them pretty simply. But you're also going around the country, so you can find out where that marriage seminar or some of the other resources might be available. Let's talk about bringing about change, because in your book, that's really the focus. And first of all, you start with the idea that we're God's masterpiece.
Yes.
And you also talk about the fact, as we mentioned a minute ago, you got to be willing to change. You got to be like the crab, not the chameleon. So how do we begin to bring about a change? We got to be willing to be changed.
That's right.
Right.
Usually people change when they either hit bottom hard enough they have to, or they learn enough we want to.
Yes.
And that's really the easier path. And so when you're willing to make the change, you have to say, okay, I don't want to be at the same spot, because the world around us is going to change anyway, and things are going to change in our life if we hold on anyway. So if we can say, okay, I've got to embrace change. A lot of times I look at change because some people hold on to it and are fearful. I said, why don't you change the word, make change exchange? And if you decide it's going to be an exchange, I'm going to exchange for something that helps me to grow, helps me to mature, helps me to be more productive and significant, then be willing to. So I think it starts with the head. I think you have to mentally put your head around it and decide I want to.
Yeah, and again, that's first. It's Romans 12, 1 and 2, and it's 1 Corinthians. There's a couple of passages.
Yeah.
And you really got to change your mindset.
That's
don't
right.
you?
That's right.
Talk about prayer too, because you mentioned, Debbie, just a minute ago in terms of prayer. You got a whole chapter here about prayer, because part of it you have to be really dedicated to prayer if you're going to bring about change.
Absolutely.
Right?
That's what I call dress for destiny.
Yes.
If I want to get out, we all did this morning. We got up. We know we're going outside. We said, okay, it may be cold. I need to wear a coat. We obviously need to wear our pants and shirt and those sort of things. And we won't leave the house undressed. But I think sometimes we leave the house spiritually undressed. And then we wonder when we get out there, we say, man, this is a lot harder than I thought, or this problem or pressure or stress is very difficult. So I challenge you that in the mornings, develop a prayer life. And I don't say you have to stick to an hour. I just say start. What creates the appetite? I learned to do that at an early age because when I was saved, God changed my heart, and I didn't know anything about it. I didn't have any friends because my old friends were afraid of me. They didn't know what I was doing. The new friends were afraid of me and saying, we're in church. We weren't living like you were. So I would literally just spend hours praying. And I got to tell you, Kerby, I say this just, God needed it in my life to do it, and I needed it. I would spend sometimes 6 and 8 hours in a prayer closet. I mean, that was 3 years. I'm just
sounds like the movie War Room.
Yeah. I am just now coming out in the public life. I mean, really, by nature, I'm shy. I won't be in a group of people. I would rather be alone in a prayer closet than out in public. But suddenly the last year or so, God's saying, okay, it's time to come out and meet the world. But I would be in that prayer closet. And when I read Matthew 6:6, he said, when you pray, go in the closet, shut the door, and your Father that sees in secret will reward you openly. I literally put a pillow in my closet and shut the door. My own mother, because I'd just been saved then and I was still young, my own mother saw me doing that, and she called the pastor of the church. She said, he's gone overboard. He's going in there and shutting the door and praying for hours. She said, he's taking it too serious. But I needed to. There was so much that had to come out of my life, and transforming my thoughts had to be put in through the Word. So God used that, and he taught me that you can hear God's voice. You can read the Word and see the Word as God wants you to see it. You can learn and grow that way. And there's got to be a place where it's comfortable, and that's what it does. And so I challenge people, develop your prayer life. That prayer and the Word are the two things you need. It takes 2 legs to walk, 2 wings to fly. Prayer and the Word is going to keep you going when the rest of the world falls.
A lot of wisdom there. Let me jump on a couple other issues. And that is, if you want to bring about change, you have to envision the future you talk about. You got to have a plan. You got to imagine the future. You've got to work the plan. First of all, you got to plan the work and then work the plan.
That's right.
Talk about that if you might.
I think it's kind of like when Nehemiah did. He went out and saw the situation, and then he said, but I didn't tell him what God put in my heart. I don't tell people go name it and claim it. I just say, listen, what you need to do is get in the Word and see what God puts in your heart. And God will give to each of us some particular insights and an impression. He will put into our heart the vision he wants us to live out for our life, matching it with our gifts. And then as we do that, we'll find that suddenly it becomes clear as we go. And for me, vision is kind of like this. I kind of know the direction I want to go and where I want to be. Like my goal is to reach unchurched people.
Right.
So I say I want to be alert and aware of people around me that don't know God, and see if God will open those doors. But in every life, when you do that, when you start walking a vision, you may not have the full picture. It's like driving your car at night. Your headlights only get you so far, but then when you get there, there's more light to get where you want to go. And I think if we walk in the light we have, God will give us more light as we go when we need it.
There's also kind of an attitude check, because you have some great contradictions here. The crab and the chameleon. You have another one, dreamers and schemers. Sometimes when people have plans, it's all about me, and what I'm going to get. It really should be what God wants and what I can give, right?
Yes. If you want to do God's will, and you will put yourself in neutral and just say, Lord, you're the driver. I used to see those bumper stickers that said, God is my co-pilot. He don't want to be the co-pilot. He wants to be the pilot. And so when I can say, okay, God, you're in charge. Sometimes, you remember when you look back at your life, Kierkegaard said it this way. He said, we live life going forward, but we understand it looking backwards. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes, well, then, if I know that to be true, then why don't I just start trusting for the future? Why don't I just quit scheming and not try to elbow my way to the front and not try to, push myself first? Let me just follow the leading of the Holy Spirit in my life. Let me read the Word and grow in Christ and just walk through the doors that God opens. And as I do that, I find out later that I look back and say, that was pretty neat of God. He's always got a better plan. Somebody asked me one time, said, how do you know if it's your will or God's? I said, well, generally, if it's my will, there's a lot of struggle to it, and there's a lot of stress in it. If it's God's will, it works in the end. Even if there's struggle and stress, there's peace in it. There's peace, certainly. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll finish off our conversation today with Bill Purvis. And again, we're just touching scratching the surface and just touching a couple of the key points, but I think you're going to find this book really helpful, not only for you to begin to grow as a Christian, but also to hand this to the unchurched. And I think you really hear his heart to pass that on to others that need a word and need to be
driven back to and focused on the Savior. So again, the book is entitled Make a Break for It, Unleashing the Power of Personal and Spiritual Growth. That is published by Zondervan. I think it's your first book. We've waited too long. I hope your second and third come real fast here now after that. And when we come back, we'll talk about risk takers, caretakers, and undertakers.
Okay.
That's a good line here. And because if you're going to change, you've got to take some risk, and that's very important as well. And if you say, gosh, I want to know a little bit more about Dr. Bill Purvis, well, you can go to the website, billpurvis.com. We have a link at it, pointofview.net. You can find out a lot more about him. You can find some of the sermons, videos, and, of course, you can get the book there. And you'll probably be able to find it in your local bookstore as well. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Bill Purvis with us for a few more minutes as again we talk about the book Make a Break for It, Unleashing the Power of Personal and Spiritual Growth. Talked about risk takers, caretakers, and undertakers. Great line. I'm sure that was a sermon that you gave. But in there you talk about this idea of faith over fear. People have a fear of failure. You got to be willing to take a risk if you're going to bring about change.
Yeah, one of the greatest detriments I think that people have is fear. They make fear a lot bigger than it really is. They allow it to paralyze them. They allow it to stop them in their tracks. And there are many people that I hate to say, but they live their life later looking back with regret.
Yes. And
I think that the thing we have to realize is if God's brought us this far and we can remember what he's done in the past, why can't we trust him for the future? And so when there's an opportunity or when there's something that he's called us to do, yes, it's scary, but it's no different than it was with the people that we look at as heroes in the Bible. Abraham had to get up and leave an area he was very comfortable with and go out to the land that God would show him. Moses had to do the same. Abraham again had to do that when he took his son Isaac up on the hillside. All of those Bible characters that we look at and say, what great heroes, and we talk about their faith. Well, I wonder if anybody in heaven's talking about us. I wonder if anybody's saying, look at what they're doing down there. They're carrying the ball. They're willing to do the same. And I think God's looking for a church today, because we today should be even more beyond our fear than they were. I mean, we've got them as examples that God came through. So if anything, the church ought to be stronger today than it's ever been in its history. And I think sometimes we've just allowed ourselves to walk too much by sight, not enough by faith.
I watched one of your sermons where you're talking about that. In Hebrews 12, the great cloud of witnesses. It's kind of like, if they succeeded, why couldn't we? And you go to kind of the Hebrews Hall of Faith, which is in Hebrews 11. You kind of get spooked a little bit. I've been to some of these Hall of Fames, like Basketball Hall of Fame. I saw, I can't relate to Michael Jordan,
right? But
same thing. Hebrews Hall of Fame, you got Abraham, you got Enoch, but you know what? You also have Rahab and some others. So you recognize that it doesn't matter whether you are the great man or woman of faith, or maybe you had really very little faith and not much to commend to you. I think all of us have an opportunity, and all of us have a ministry.
That's right. There's a place for every one of us there, and it's just up to us to be willing to say, Lord, why don't we trust you? And I know it's not easy. I realize that every time. I even find myself sometimes I will preach and teach people, have faith and trust God, He'll take care of you. Then when God challenges me, I think, Lord, this is for them, but I know in my own life I've got to do the same. And every time I've trusted Him, I've looked back and been glad. And I've marveled at the way He puts things together that I could have never figured out. I think I can think of 100 ways that God's going to work it out, and He always does the one I never saw. And so I'm looking to the east, and He does it from the west.
Yes. You have a chapter here on the end of excuses, and really we see that in the scriptures. Moses, I'm not articulate, and Gideon, it's only me. Even later Elijah says, I'm the only one, and all those kinds of things. So we see excuses in the Bible, but boy, we sure can come up with excuses in the 21st century, can't we?
We can. It's easy to wrap ourselves around a story. I didn't have the best family, or the best background, or the best education, or the boss that supported me, or the wife that was there for me. And it's easy to wrap ourselves around the story. Sometimes the story we tell ourselves is the one thing that's keeping us from being where we ought to be.
Yes.
And so we have to stop and say, let's look at this story. We may have to just divorce that story. Say, okay, that story that I've been living by, and that story that I've been using as excuse, it worked for a while, and it got me sympathy, and it got people to say, poor you. But in reality, it didn't help me to go further with God or grow my faith.
Very good.
So there comes a time we need to say, okay, let's kill the story and let's write a new one by trusting God and living differently.
One other one I thought I'd mention just before we ran out of time, choose your mentors well.
Yes.
We really are talking about how important it is to have mentors, to be a mentor if you're our age, but also to begin to find some individuals that can give you some direction, some guidance, some wisdom.
Absolutely. You don't have to make all the mistakes yourself. I was familiar with a guy that used to shoot pool or billiards, and he used to say, go to school on another man's shot. And his talk of that, or his meaning behind that, was learn from them. And I found with mentors, if I want to grow more in a certain area, find somebody who's doing something in that area that I want. And if they've done better financially, if they've done better with their marriage, if they've done better with their spiritual life, then go to them. And you'll find that people that really have a heart for God, and people that have learned something, they're easy to share it. I've always found sometimes we get intimidated by those at the top, and the people I've met at the top are the easiest people that I know to approach. They generally say, hey, I've got the knowledge, I have the information, and I've been treated like a king by some of the best people in every area, from theology to finances, and they're just like, I'm glad somebody has an eager heart and they want to learn. So I challenge people to go to somebody that they want to grow in an area, find that area, and ask them, make themselves available. Learn what you can from them.
Yes. Again, this book is something that you really do recommend to a Christian that wants to grow in his or her faith.
Yes.
But I see this as a book that you're hoping maybe some of our Christian listeners here could pass on to their non-Christian friends. How could they maybe get this in the hands of some of their unsaved friends?
Yeah. Well, after you order it, whether it be at Amazon or at our website, billpurvis.com, what I would say is get one for yourself, and then get one for some friend, somebody that you care about. Pray about it. Write their name in it, dear so-and-so, and write a little special note to them, and then just ask them to read it. And if they'll start reading a chapter 2, come back to them afterwards and just ask, have you been reading the book? What'd you think? And let that open the conversation. And I believe at that point you can use my story and God's miracle there, perhaps to get their attention, and then they can tell them, hey, God did this in my life, and here's where God is. And I think it'd be an easy way to bridge the gospel to a lot of people that perhaps have not yet heard it. And they've seen tracts, they've been invited to church, but if they had something to hand to somebody like that, it might make a big difference.
Again, BillPurvis.com, lots of resources that are available there. And if people want to find out more about the marriage seminar that you do or get some of those resources, it's all available at the website.
Yeah. Thank you for having me today, too.
Yeah, I might just mention Cascade Hills Church. And if you're in Columbus, Georgia, come by, and I'm sure you'd be glad to let everybody get a chance to sit and listen and say, I heard you on radio.
That's right.
That guy.
And I hang around after each service, so come up and talk to me. Tell me you heard me on this station.
Well, again, it's just been great to have you in studio, and I appreciate you being here. Let's do this again sometime.
I'd love to. Thank you.
Let me just mention that tomorrow we're going to get into all sorts of issues, and today we had 2 guests in studio. Tomorrow it's just going to be bang, 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 bang. We've got Tom Gilson. He's spoken on all sorts of different issues. We're going to talk about this issue of homosexuality for a little bit. We recognize that there are elections today in Arizona and Utah, and many of you live in those states, so we're going to kind of cover some of that tomorrow. Then Eric Erickson's going to be with us. You know, he has said that he would not vote for Donald Trump, so we're going to hear what he has to say about that. And then we also have one of the producers of God Is Not Dead 2. We've had a chance over the last couple of weeks to talk about some of these faith-based films like Risen and The Young Messiah and Miracles from Heaven, but now the latest one, God Is Not Dead 2. Kelly Shackelford, who joins us on Friday, is actually just was at the premiere last night, and so we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well. So we have a lot to cover tomorrow, and so you're going to have to listen fast because we're going to cover lots of issues, and then Chip Ingram will be with us later in the week and so many other topics. But today we've been privileged to have Bill Purvis in studio, and if you say, this was good, I want to hear this again, you can go to our website, pointofview.net. You can download the podcast and listen to it, or maybe you'd like to watch it, go to our YouTube channel, or, I guess in maybe a few hours, probably Bill Purvis will have it on his website, so you can watch it there as well. So that's just a great opportunity. So again, all sorts of resources available at pointofview.net. And as I mentioned today, we have had a little bit of a downturn in our financial support. So if you can help us out, we would greatly appreciate it. You're not only supporting the 2-hour radio program, but all the things on our website, all the videos, all the other resources and books and other things that we make available to you. So please take the time to visit the website, pointofview.net. You can find my commentary today that certainly relates to some of the things in the election season. We have our Take Action item. We also have our video series. And, of course, we still have our Pray, Organize, and Vote election resources. I recognize many of you have already voted. Of course, we have the general election coming up, but we're encouraging, even if you've been there before, go back and take the pledge. It is a pledge to pray for our nation, a pledge to educate and encourage others, and a pledge to finally to vote. And of course, for those of you in many of the states that have not voted, we have all sorts of resources, not just on the presidential election, but we have 34 different U.S. Senate races, 435 races for the House of Representatives, 22 different states having state legislative races. So we have all that information there for you as well, so you can vote intelligently. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. Going to have a busy day tomorrow. Hope you'll join us then.
Later this year, for the 58th time, America will choose a president. As a Christian, what are you doing to prepare for the election? Helping you cut through the major media spin is part of the mission of Point of View. We want to provide the best election resources, including a new website, Pray, Organize, Vote, encouraging people to intercede for the upcoming election, to help you get registered so you can exercise the stewardship of voting, to share things to help you get people involved and out to the polls. But to do all of that, we need you to vote right now with your support for Point of View. Show us that you're in this for the long haul as a citizen of heaven as well as the United States. Click Donate Now at the top of the page and give the most generous one-time gift you can at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. There is a lot of work to be done. Let's get to it together. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.